they were discussing shielding your wealth. Have you ever heard of people who made money, lots of money at some point, but it's all by the time they were supposed to enjoy it or pass on to the world, their children, they didn't have anything. I think I have heard a number of people, even especially those in the creative space. You know, you hear of a musician who was very famous. They sang all their life, their music was loved by everybody, but on their deathbed, they're begging for contributions simply because the money maybe they got in their prime time, they didn't know how to protect it, to shield it. So that's why we thought we could come with this topic. Just discuss. You may not be in the creative world. You may be in business, and sometimes it's very easy to have money at some stage, and at the end of your journey, you're like everybody else who never had money. You know, I've heard people discussing of then people even where we grew up, where you know that that family, they used to have lots of money. That businessmen, they used to have lots of money. So it's very common, especially as entrepreneurs, to create wealth at some stage, and at some stage lose everything, and you end up with nothing, as if you never started. Themba, do you know of any famous people who were once rich and went broke?
I know of many famous people, and I've read of many famous people who made lots of money and who went broke. So let's just remind our audience of some of the well-known names. I'm not going to talk about names that have not been publicized because then I'll be in trouble with people. So let's just stick to names that are in the public domain. Tafadzwa, ever heard of a professional fighter called Mike Tyson? Mike Tyson was a professional fighter. In fact, during his peak, I think he used to earn something like $22 million per fight. And it is actually estimated that during his career, he earned about $500 million. But in 2003, he filed for bankruptcy in America because of debts that he had accumulated. So I guess, Tafadzwa, before we even go and talk to our audience about how to shield your money, I think one thing is quite obvious. Don't accumulate unsustainable debt. Many people who make quite a lot of money end up swimming in a lot of debts. In fact, his debts were so high that a particular law firm reported that he owed something like 28.4 million to creditors. And those creditors included the tax department. So another insight that I would want to share with the audience, and we'll get into the details. If you want to shield your money, just pay your dues, render to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, because there is a Caesar in this world who wants every rand, every dollar that you make, or they want a portion of it. So that's one name that we can give to each other. Let me also mention to our audience some of the names that they might not have heard. Probably these names are not very, very popular. There was a lady called Elizabeth Holmes. She filed for bankruptcy in 2013. I think she was known at some point. This woman made it to the cover of the Forbes magazine for founding a very incredible startup that was worth about 9 billion. And then she was convicted of criminal fraud through a company. Her company was called, Theranos. That was the name of the company. This company claimed to have developed a revolutionary blood test, and he was testing and hundreds of diseases and medical conditions with just a few drops. But later on, it was proved that the technology was not tested. So she was sentenced to 20 years in prison. So just an example of a person who went from zero to hero. So don't commit any fraud. Don't be on the wrong side of the law. Then let me see if I can find any other name on my list that I prepared here. Um, then there was a former CEO of a company called EBX Group, Elk Batista. Again, in 2013, he filed for bankruptcy. It wasn't because of fraud, but it was simply because of adverse economic conditions. So at one point, this guy was the seventh richest person in the world, Elk Batista. Imagine moving from the seventh richest person in the world to really nothing. He was an oil baron, and his oil company was called OGX. But however, due to his failure to manage the production targets, he started losing money. And the situation worsened when, Brazil's economy suffered a tough time. There's one thing that I would want to mention about shielding our wealth. One of the wisdom that we must have is that economies move in cycles. When I was growing up, I knew of people who had lots of money, but then hyperinflation then hit the economy where I grew up, and people lost all that money. So that's what happened with El Batista. He had a net worth of 30 billion and he ended up with zero. He actually ended up with a lot of debts and went bankrupt. Imagine having a wealth of 30 billion at some point and then losing it all. Surely Mr. Batista should have come up with methods to shield his wealth. Then there was a guy who also filed for bankruptcy in 2011, Sean Quinn, and he was an Irish businessman. And he was noted as the richest man in Ireland, according to the Forbes magazine, at that point. Um, and Mr. Batista was, worth billions of dollars. And by the time that he filed for bankruptcy, he owed banks something like 2.8 billion. And part of his downfall was a lavish lifestyle. So this was a guy who lived, very, very lavishly. And he went bankrupt, right? I don't want to talk about Benny Madoff. Benny Madoff operated a Ponzi scheme. At some point, he was worth billions. He was a respected person. By the way, the people that I'm talking about were billionaires at some point. I started off with Mike Tyson. I've got a list, and this list goes on of people who made billions of dollars and then they lost it all. Some of them lost it because there was a global financial crisis and the business went into trouble. And part of what we would want to discuss today is it possible to shield your wealth so that through economic cycles, through the ups and downs of life, you can actually retain your wealth. Um, Maybe I can talk about Alan Stanford. Alan Stanford was the former chairperson and CEO of the Stanford Financial Group. He also filed for bankruptcy because of legal issues and because of fraud of 7 billion, dollars. What is surprising about all these people that end up losing a lot of money is that by the time that they are going bankrupt, most of them are involved in fraud, they are involved in legal problems, and some of them even end up in prison. And when I look at the list of billionaires here, some people who were billionaires, I think the list, comprises of young people. I can talk about Sam Bankman-Fried, who filed for bankruptcy in 2022. He was a very young man. I think he has recently been sentenced now. He was ranked the 41st, richest American in the Forbes list, and he was the 60th richest person in the world. His net worth during its peak was at 26.5 billion. So Tafadzo, I can go on. I can also see women on the list. So quite a number of women again. But it boils down to debt. It boils down to adverse economic conditions. And those are the things that we would want to talk about, Tafadzo. Maybe I can put you on the spot here, Tafadzo. I know I had not warned you in advance. Let me just ask you a question. Is it possible to shield your wealth? What do you think?
I believe it is possible. The fact that not everyone ends up bankrupt, it means there's some who know the secrets to shielding their wealth. One thing I've also discovered, I've had the privilege of interacting with some people who are really wealthy. And one thing I've noticed, many people don't give money like that. Even if you ask like for 200 rands, you have to be convincing why they should give you 200 rands. So I believe such people know how to shield their wealth because they know how to say no. Like you were talking about living a lavish lifestyle. Sometimes when you've got the money in the account, there's no plan to shield. Every call that you get of people asking for money, you just give like that without accountability. But if you have a plan for shielding the wealth, and you have also the mindset of shielding the wealth, then you know when to say yes and when to say no, whether it's a lifestyle, whether it's giving people money. There's always need. But if you have a plan, you know who to give and who not to give.
That's an important point that you have just brought up there, Tafadzwa. I call it valuing money. One of the money skills that I teach to people is you must value money. One of my role models is a gentleman called Warren Buffett. I've studied Warren Buffett, I've read his books, and I listen to his talks. He's one of the guys who really value money. And when we're talking about valuing money, it's, Warren Buffett is known for even valuing 1 cent. In fact, there is a story attributed to Warren Buffett. I don't know how true the story is, Tafadzo, so don't take me to task if it's not a true story. But the story goes on something like this. Warren Buffett noticed 1 cent coin on the floor of the list of a particular lift. He had people, there were quite a number of people in the lift, and then there was a 1 cent coin. So the people who came into the lift and left the lift, they would trample upon this 1 cent coin. But Warren Buffett, upon noticing the 1 cent coin, he actually picked that 1 cent coin. And people were actually surprised. Why is this billionaire picking up 1 cent coin when he's got lots of billions in his bank account? And he ended up explaining to people that, look, if I invest this 1 cent coin today, in 100 years, it would amount to this. And he did the mathematics for them. And that boils down to the power of compound interest. So what I see with some people who end up losing money is that by the time that they've accumulated money, they lose this ability to value money. At some point, because they live under the impression that they've accumulated quite a lot of money, they end up recklessly spending the money. And so the point that you have brought up there is very, very important. It doesn't matter how much wealth you accumulate, you must always value money. And even at some stage, after you've accumulated quite a lot of money and you decide to give some of the money to people, and we encourage people to give money, then have a particular formula for giving, and um, create structures for giving money. There are structures that people create as they do their philanthropic, activities. So that's a huge, point that you have just highlighted there, Tafadzo.
So how can we shield our wealth?
I've got quite a number of ideas here, Tafadzo. I've got 10 points that I would want to go through. Point number one, maybe you've built wealth, you've built a portfolio of investments, you've got money. Don't operate out of fear. That's a very important point, Tafadzo. And here, let me just go to the Bible. You might, Tafadzo, you read the Bible and you would know about Job. Job was a very rich man during his time. But then in Job chapter 3, verse 25, after he had experienced the problems, he was heard saying that for the thing that I feared, he has overtaken me. And it would seem to me, reading that verse, that though Job had accumulated wealth, he always feared losing the money. So here is the first thing that I would want to advise people as far as shielding your money. There are two emotions that you must learn to master and to manage very well. If you don't manage these emotions very well, you will end up losing your wealth that you have accumulated. The first emotion that you should manage is the emotion of fear. People that act out of fear, people that are fearful in their investment decisions and in their decision making, end up losing money. People, the other emotion that we must manage is the emotion of greed. People that are greedy, which is why people end up operating Ponzi schemes and involved in fraud. To me, it's all about greed. And so as you start on your journey of accumulating wealth, it's very, very, very important that you spend time mastering those emotions of fear. What am I talking about when I talk about fear? There are people who accumulate wealth because the economy has been good. And then sometimes they spend sleepless nights worrying about tomorrow, and they are fearful of losing that wealth. And one thing that I can guarantee you is that if you operate out of fear, you will end up losing that money. It doesn't matter how much money that you have accumulated. Fear and money cannot coexist. I think that's the one thing that I'm really trying to say. That's point number one, under shielding your money. Point number two, under shielding your money, is avoid conspicuous consumption. There are certain people who, when they accumulate money, they are very conspicuous in their consumption. They want always to make a statement of arrival. Tafadzo, I don't know if you've come across, let's probably say somebody who has committed fraud and they are sitting with a lot of money. The first thing that they think of doing is not investing the money. The first thing that they think of doing is actually spending the money. If the first thing that you have in your mind when you get money is, I will spend and get the BMW of my dream, the house of my dream, you will lose money when you get it. And Tafazo, did you know how they catch criminals? We have caught money. They look for the people that are driving flashy cars, the people that are living a lavish lifestyle, because for some reason, there are people who are conspicuous in their consumption once they get money. Here is the thought that I would want you to meditate upon. What if you get lots of money and you maintain your lifestyle and you are not conspicuous in your consumption? So I'm not saying live a life of poverty. I'm not saying take a vow of poverty. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you are conspicuous in your consumption and you are the person that always wants to make a statement of arrival. Let me give you two stories, Tafanzo. The one story, and I will not mention the name of the person involved, but there was a person who gave the impression that he was an entrepreneur. And so he went to the Durban July. The Durban July is a very famous racing event that happens in Durban in South Africa. So, sometimes when people go to the Durban July, they want to make a statement about the assets that they have. So he went to the Durban July with a convoy of cars, and everyone was wondering, who is this guy who has arrived at this event with a convoy of luxury cars? And then when people started asking questions and digging into his business dealings, a lot of things were found, how he had been dishonest in getting this particular tender and getting that particular tender. And obviously, when that happens, the tax authorities will come after you. I've always wondered, why does that person not just be, why don't they just, lie low, make lots of money and not be conspicuous in their consumption? Because you attract quite a lot of attention. You even attract the attention of investigators. You attract the attention of haters. You attract the attention of tax authorities, and it's unnecessary attention. Like I said, Tafazo, one of my role models is Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett has lived in the same house since the 70s. Warren Buffett is not known for a lavish lifestyle, but he's sitting with a lot of billions. And those are the habits, the disciplines that have caused him to accumulate the wealth that he has accumulated. Point number 3, avoid pride of ownership. Tafato, have you come across people who want to boast and say, that's my car, that's my house, and all their assets are registered in their names? Do you know what typically happens? When you get into trouble, your creditors will come after your house, they will come after everything written in your name. And here I just want to give 2 examples. The other one is a hilarious example. It's about a soccer star who the soccer star who divorced the wife. And obviously the wife was under the impression that this guy had money, but he had registered all his assets in the mother's name. So during the divorce settlement, the wife didn't get quite a lot of money. I'm not saying register assets in the name of, your mother. All I'm just trying to say is that life does happen. My preference is for you to register your assets in the name of a company. And later on, I will say to you, put your assets in a trust, which is my last point that I will say, but I will get there because that's how people pass on generational wealth. What we are encouraging all of us to do is to learn from the people that have lost money. And the people that are concerned with passing generational wealth and protecting their money, they tend to put their assets in a trust. And there is a way to do that. Probably Tafadzwa, in a later show, we can focus on that. So that's my 3rd point. Avoid pride of ownership, right? Registering things in your name because people will look for your name. The second example that I would want to give, and I will not give names, Tafazo, here because I don't want to be in trouble with people, but, from public records, I knew of a criminal who had been, this guy had been sequestrated. Sometimes if you fail to manage your debts, you are sequestrated by law and somebody manages your affairs because the law is saying you can't manage your affairs. And this guy was sequestrated. He was put under administration by the courts. But what surprised people is that he still maintained his lifestyle, driving the flashy car. And it was then noticed that, the assets that he had accumulated over time, he had been registered in the name of a trust. This guy didn't register, although he was a criminal, and I'm not encouraging anyone to do criminal activity, but he was clever in the sense that he did not register assets in his name. And even when investigators came looking out for his assets, they couldn't find anything registered in his name. His assets were registered either in the name of other people or registered in the trust. So from that point of view, I think he was clever. So avoid conspicuous consumption, which was our second point. Avoid the pride of ownership. Point number 4, Tafadzwa, practice good risk management, right? Practice good risk management. And there are 3 points that I would want to highlight, here. The first point that I would want to say is that always get insurance. Always get insurance. I cannot tell you how many businessmen that I have come across. I know of a business person who, during the riots that happened in July 2021 here in South Africa, this guy was operating a small business. And unfortunately, people went into his business premises and looted his stock. He never recovered because he never had insurance. So things do happen, and things that you never expected do happen. And what I have seen is that sometimes people downplay the importance of insurance. So it's very important, even from a personal wealth management point of view, it's very important to be adequately insured because anything can happen. Even if you are in business, it's very important to be adequately insured. We spoke about people who went into legal troubles. Obviously, if you are doing risky things, there is legal insurance that you can get. So practice good risk management. If you are a trader, one rule of trading is practice good risk management. Use stop losses, for example. Because in trading, you can have losses. Even if you are managing investments, if you are managing financial assets, it's possible for your portfolio to experience losses. Use stop losses if you are a trader. That's some form of insurance, right there. And that's one thing that you can do. So practice, good risk management. Don't gamble with your wealth. Always take calculated risks. So practicing good, risk management is part of shielding, your wealth. It doesn't matter whether you're an entrepreneur or you are building wealth as an individual. There are certain things that you can do to practice good risk management. And one of the things that I have suggested is insurance, and, to be able to be adequately insured, you might want to get good, financial, advice. Let me just give you point number 5, Tafadzo, and then I'll get your opinion on, the 5th point. The 5th point is don't guarantee other people's debts. Don't act as a surety for other people's debts. I cannot tell you, Tafadzwa, how many people I have come across who made money, but sometimes they were careless and they signed a suretyship agreement or they guaranteed somebody's debts because it was a friend. And when that friend went into trouble, the bank came after them because they had acted as a somebody who guaranteed other people's debts. Don't do that. It's a cardinal law of shielding, your own wealth. Even if you decide to be generous and to guarantee, a guarantee is as good as borrowing. right? As far as financial management is concerned, a guarantee is as good as a borrowing. So even if you decide to guarantee somebody's debts, just take it as a borrowing, from a conservative point of view. So Tafadzo, those are the 5 points that I have at the moment. What do you think?
Before I go to your comment, Trevor Masimba says, so every cent matters. Yes, indeed. Dr. Linda also said the structure in which you put assets also shields wealth. I'm not sure whether you've already touched that. If you haven't, would you want to expound on that? My opinion on being a guarantor is it's not a good idea. I don't think I trust people to that extent.
Tafazo, you're laughing. You don't trust people to that extent. Um, the point that Dr. Linda has raised is very, very important. It brings me to my sixth point. My sixth point is whenever you do business in the name of a company. So, look, in my own view, one of the greatest inventions in this world is a corporate structure, this thing of a company. Because, companies, have been used as a structure to limit somebody's liability. By the way, Tafazo, to just tell you a story, Trump is a billionaire. We all know that Donald Trump is a billionaire, but it's also a known fact that some of the companies have failed. So what he has done is he has filed for bankruptcy for those companies and continued with the sound companies that he has. One of the books that I have read, which has helped me, is the book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I'm sure some of you have read that book. In fact, I actually had my children reading the book. All my boys have read that book. But one of the well-known facts is that Robert Kiyosaki has also failed in business. Some of his companies have actually failed. But in spite of the failure in business by Robert Kiyosaki, in spite of the failure in business by people like Donald Trump, these people were quite clever because they used the structure of companies and sort of ring-fenced some of the debt. And the people that lost were the banks and not them. Because if a company files for bankruptcy, you as a shareholder, your liability is limited to what you have invested in the company, and they have continued, on their journey. So my sixth point is, if you decide to do business, don't do business as a sole trader. Don't do business in a partnership. I cannot tell you how many people have lost money. In fact, if I had time, I would have told you stories of how one partner stole from the other partner and how the one partner actually ended up being bankrupt. Because a partnership is not a good structure within which to do business, because you are jointly and severally liable for the debts that you incur as a partnership. So whenever you do business in the form of a company. And if you want to pass on generational wealth, and I am promising you that we will have a dedicated show where we will talk about trust. You can even start a trading trust. I know of friends, people that I'm friends with that hold investments in a structure called a family trust, because a trust, there are all sorts of trusts that you can actually form as a way of shielding your wealth. And the structure, that structure is a very good way of passing on generational wealth. which is very, very, good to do that. So that would be my sixth point there. My seventh point, probably I'm repeating myself here. Always pay your taxes and always try to be tax efficient. Most of the people that I have spoken about, who ended up going down were people who did not pay particular attention to their tax liabilities. And again, probably Tafazo, we can have a show to deep dive on, this particular, thing. Point number 8, don't depart from the rules that we have spoken about. As far as wealth is concerned, there are rules. And let me just revisit some of the rules that you must not depart from. Because what I see with people that have lost their wealth is that at some point they depart from fundamental rules of managing money. So rule number 1 of managing money is that a portion of what you make, give at least 10%. I don't want to go into detail of why that is necessary, but it seems to me that that 10% is some form of spiritual insurance. The way I look at the 10% is that it's a form of spiritual insurance. Even the Bible says if you tithe, God will rebuke the devourer. It's very difficult for me to point to people who were billionaires and had this practice of tithing all their life, and they ended up losing all their money. It does not happen. In fact, biblical economics, the application of biblical economics is a guarantee of you increasing your wealth, over time. So my point, my 8th point is that don't depart from fundamental laws of managing money. And one of the laws of managing money is that whatever you receive, part of what you receive is for giving. And our recommendation, Tafi's recommendation and my recommendation is that at least 10% should be given, to your church organization, to charity. That's how you sustain wealth, over time. Then 10% should be invested. So you should always be on the lookout for investments. Don't spend all that you have made. Sometimes, and I get upset with my boys sometimes. I give them 10 rand save pocket money. My expectation is that if I give them 10 rands pocket money, they should be wise enough to know that the maximum that they can spend is 8 rands, right? Because that's a fundamental way of managing money. If you get 100 rands, the maximum that you can spend is 80 rands, right? Because the 10 rands is not yours. The other 10 rands is not yours. It should be invested. It's a seed for the future. This is wisdom that has been accumulated over years. Think of a farmer. If a farmer harvests, they don't, consume everything that they have harvested. Part of it is a seed for the next year. And that's how wealth is increased over time. So that's very, very, important. Another fundamental aspect of managing money is to limit your debt. To limit your debt. People are overly indebted. If you look at the average South African, which is the country that I'm broadcasting from, the average South African, for every 100 rands of household income that they have, about 65 to 70 rands is actually used to pay off debt. That's not sustainable, at all. So my advice is that you must learn certain principles of managing debts. I've got 3 rules of managing debt, and I tell people these 3 rules. It's fundamental rules, which we mustn't depart from. Number 1, don't borrow to consume. Don't borrow to consume. If you want to shield your wealth, I'm not against people driving Ferraris. I'm not against people putting on branded clothes. I'm against somebody who puts on branded clothes and they have financed those clothes through debt. Don't borrow to consume. That's a fundamental law of managing debt. Number two, don't borrow against a depreciating asset. Don't, right? Don't borrow against a depreciating asset. If you have to buy a depreciating asset, which we all have to do at some stage, and you decide to borrow to do that, then put a significant deposit, at least 20% deposit. Most people that finance a depreciating asset for 100%, they never recover. They are trapped in debt. And then the last thing that I would advise you as far as debt is concerned is that if you want to accumulate debt in the name of a company, accumulate debt in the name of a corporate structure, which gives you tax advantages. Don't borrow in your name. I don't borrow in my name. I borrow in the name of a company. I do borrow money, but the borrowings that I do is against business income. And that's what I do. And so, because even the Bible, Tafazo, did you know that there is a verse in the Bible that says, "Oh, no one, anything except to love them." So we should owe people a debt of love in our lives, not to. So in my name, I follow biblical principle. I don't owe anybody anything. Every borrowing that I have is in the name of a corporate. And if things go wrong, right, because because I own a number of companies, I just file for bankruptcy. And that's what other people have done. Point number 9, there is a fundamental law of diversification. Diversify, diversify, diversify. There is a fundamental law of creating several streams of income. The reason why you would want to diversify, the reason why you would want to create several sources of income, streams of income, is because you don't know what the future holds. I think I gave you a number of examples of billionaires that failed because the economy turned against them. Like this guy that I told you about, who was an oil baron. He was a billionaire, worth 30 billion. And then oil prices went down. He was overly borrowed. Whenever you borrow, set limits. Set limits. My limit for borrowing is that if I'm earning 100 rands, and I insist on these limits even in my own company, if the company earns 100 rands, I cannot spend more than 30 rands in borrowings, right? So we call it a debt service ratio in banking. So my debt service ratio should not be more than 30 rands, right? Some people have a debt service ratio that goes as high as 65%, and as high as 70%. That's not sustainable, especially with high interest rates. It's not, sustainable. So diversify. When we talk about diversification, and probably will deep dive on diversification at some point, because time is running up. Our time is going to further. There are 3 things that I would want to say about diversification. The first thing that I would want to say about diversification is that always watch the economy in which you are creating wealth. And one of the things that you must watch is inflation. If I look at some people that I knew who were wealthy when I was growing up, these were people that they did not diversify their wealth outside of the economy that they were operating in. So diversify your assets, even globally, investments in territories that are doing well. Nothing wrong with that. Diversify and earn money in hard currency. If you are operating in an economy that has got a weak currency, that's part of shielding your wealth, because inflation, forget about wrong business decisions, forget about debt. One of the devourers of wealth is inflation. And it doesn't matter whether you're running a business, whether you're managing your own personal finances, just know that there are three enemies that you have. I normally put it simply in that manner. Enemy number one is inflation. Inflation is something that devours wealth. So part of shielding your wealth is investing in inflation protected instruments. I allocate part of my investment in fixed income instruments. And whenever I hear an inflation protected bond, I put it in my portfolio. Anything that shields me from inflation. I like investing in property because property, in most cases, shields one from inflation. I like investing in shares, obviously with a strategy, because over a long, sustainable period of time, shares is one way of shielding yourself against inflation. So enemy number one that destroys wealth is inflation. Enemy number two that destroys wealth is taxes. I know I've spoken about taxes, and I cannot emphasize this enough. It's almost impossible to build sustainable wealth without minimizing and optimizing your tax obligations. It's almost impossible. Most of the rich people that I know take some time, and some of them actually employ financial advisors to advise them on tax and how to optimize their tax. And so if I come across an investment where people are talking about its tax efficient investment, I look at it because I don't want to pay more taxes than I should be paying. So enemy number one that we should shield ourselves against is inflation. You shield yourself against inflation through growth. And this is something that we will explain, later on. Growth. So for example, if you are an employee who wants to shield their income, just make sure that you are getting a salary increases which is higher than inflation, because inflation does destroy wealth. And you need to shield your wealth against inflation. You need to shield your wealth against taxes. So minimize your tax obligation. The third enemy that we have is costs. Costs. It doesn't matter whether you're running a business, it doesn't matter whether you're running a household, you need to be saving on costs because it's an enemy. Costs are an enemy. By the way, don't count your dollars until they have passed through inflation, they have passed through taxes, they have passed through costs, right? Sometimes I ask people, what is the return that you are earning on your investments? Then they say, I'm earning 10% return on my investments. Then I ask them, have you considered inflation, right? Because if you are earning 10% before inflation and inflation is, let's just say 5%, your real growth is 5%. In other words, your return is to pass through inflation. We call it a real return or real growth. So you don't count your return until they've passed through inflation. Similarly, if you say I earned 10% on my investment and that 10% is before tax, no, it's not the return. You only look at a return after tax, after the taxman has taken what they need to take, because taxes are an enemy. And also after costs. Sometimes if you ever, have, these people that sell investments and they say to you, invest in this investment and you will earn a return of 15%. And then it looks great to you, but they haven't told you about all the hidden costs that are associated with that investment. So the wisest thing to do, if you are interested in shielding your wealth, is to say, what is the return after costs? And what is it that I can do to minimize my costs? Here is the thing. Many people that are very good at shielding their wealth are negotiators. I can almost tell you now, you will never build sustainable wealth if you are not a great negotiator. I've learned to negotiate. And the reason why I've learned to negotiate is that good negotiators, particularly if they are negotiating a deal, it's an opportunity to minimize your costs. So the point that I'm highlighting here is they are enemies of investment, and we must be aware of these enemies, particularly when we are shielding our wealth. But I was on point number 9, Tafato, and point number 9 was on diversification. Point number 9 was on creating streams of income. At the end of the day, it's possible for your stream of income to dry up. Let me just give advice for somebody who's got one stream of income, and your stream of income is a salary. Look, I can tell you of many people that I have come across who were earning huge salaries. And then some of them, for example, I knew of a finance director whom I admired very well. He was earning a huge salary. And then what then happened is that he developed a dreaded disease. He developed cancer and he stopped working. And, in an effort to fight cancer, he ended up spending quite a lot of money, fighting cancer. And he wasn't earning money. And then he ended up dying very poor. Would we blame him? Probably not. Could he have foreseen that he was going to develop a dreaded disease? Probably not. But, there are things that he could have done. He could have diversified his income, not only relied on the salary, because the salary is as good as when you are working. When you stop working and you stop earning, it becomes a problem, right? It becomes a huge, huge problem. A salary is as good as if the company needs you. Sometimes the company doesn't need you and they are retrenching people. I know of executives that have been retrenched and they hadn't prepared for that retrenchment. And, these are sad stories. Could they have shielded their wealth? Yes, they could have shielded their wealth. They could have shielded their wealth through investments. And the advice that I would want to give you is that if you are earning your salary, use investments to convert that earned income into a passive stream of income. And don't get excited with the salary. Don't get excited with the salary. Salaries are good, very, very good. And the other advice that I would want to give to salary earners is that, and I learned this trick when I became an executive at AMSA. When you are a salary earner and you are at the bottom of the organizational chart, or you are in middle management, it's not a good place to be. When I became an executive and they showed me the remuneration, suddenly they showed me that I could earn shares of the company, I could earn performance bonuses, and I began to realize that, executives have got different streams of income, although they are working for the same company. So here is the thing. If you're earning a salary, make yourself promotable. Create streams of income for yourselves, whether it's through performance bonuses, through shares to those that have got access to share ownership. It's part of shielding your wealth instead of just relying on a salary. So diversification and creation of streams of income, because during certain economic cycles, income streams do dry up. And then point number 10 is something that we're going to elaborate on in future presentations that Taffy and I will do. Put your assets in a trust. Let me just stop there, and then I will build a case for that. It's something that I have observed. People that want to shield their wealth, they put it in a trust. Trusts are the tightest form of legal protection that you can have. Unless there's been an illegality, you can't really touch a trust. Some of them, obviously, we can be tax efficient about them, and that's something that we're going to discuss at some point. What do you think about the other 5 points that I have given, Tafato, as we round up?
I was going to comment on the issue of partnership, because you mentioned that it's risky. Like you didn't recommend for people to be sole traders or get into a partnership. Because usually what makes people get into a partnership is to have resources. Maybe you want to start a business, but you don't have enough money, or maybe someone has access to funds and you don't, but you have you're an expert in something that that person doesn't have. So do you then maybe encourage people to have joint ventures? I think joint ventures, isn't it like you have two companies, separate companies, then you just come together for a cause? How can people work around that? Because normally what forces people to get into a partnership is maybe you have more hands or more brain.
Let me make a general point, probably not related to your question, Tafazo, but this is a general point that I would want to, encourage people. I have seen people who lose wealth, and some of them are very lazy at studying legal agreements. Have you ever come across somebody who is given a legal document and then they just say, what is it all about? And then they go on to sign it. If you would want to protect your wealth, um, don't enter into a contract that you don't understand. Don't enter into a partnership without an agreement that is legally tied, that protects you, because that's very, very important. So I guess my point here, Tafadzwa, is that in business, we would need to enter into legal agreements. Even as partners, we would need to enter into legal agreements. If you would want to shield your wealth, pay particular attention to legal provisions. Where you are legally challenged, always involve lawyers. In fact, the more complex the deals you are doing, the more assets you get, involve lawyers. The other thing that I always see, Tafazo, and I'm making a general point, I'm advising here people who want to shield their wealth. Do you know that there are people in this world who think that getting advice is costly? So they never get financial advice, they never get legal advice. My advice is that if you would want to shield your wealth, the more quality advice you get, the more you are able to shield, your wealth. So say, for example, you would want to enter into a partnership, get advice, pay, I've said minimize your costs, but one of the costs that you must be prepared to pay for is cost for legal advice and cost for tax advice and costs for financial advice. You should not hesitate as a wealth builder to pay, reasonable amounts for those pieces of advice. If you are the kind of person who says, I will not pay for tax advice, I will not pay for financial advice, I will not pay for legal advice, you will end up not being able to protect yourself, legally. So let me then get on to your question, Tafazo. Your question was, how do I enter into a partnership in a way that advantages me? Get legal advice, get financial advice, sit down with a skilled lawyer, explain to them, this is what I want to get out of the partnership. What are some of the clauses in the partnership that protect me? There is a soccer coach with, I will not mention his name. Tafazo, when you talk about protecting your wealth, these are cases that we meet, on a daily basis. There is a soccer coach who is in court right now, well-known soccer coach. He was given a legal agreement by this soccer team, never actually studied the legal agreement, went to sign the legal agreement, and he is in trouble because the soccer company is suing him. He did the right thing, he got an offer. And so what I see is that people enter into agreement without sound legal advice, without thinking about things that can go wrong. Tafazo, it's now 5 o'clock. I know you always ask me for a parting shot. Here is my parting shot to those that are listening to us. The act of shielding wealth is a consideration of what can go wrong, right? So if you are building wealth, always have at the back of your mind, what is it that can go wrong? How can I protect myself? If you are building wealth as an employee, as an executive, what can go wrong? What can go wrong is a risk management discussion. So don't assume that the world will continue the way that it is. Always have this idea that says, what can go wrong? If these things were to go wrong, how can I protect myself? And that's the parting shot that I would want to give to all of, to everyone who is following us. Don't have this idea that the world will continue the way that it is. You may be experiencing good times, but always have at the back of your mind what can go wrong. Tafadzo, I know you always ask me, how can people get hold of me? The easiest way to get hold of me is to do it via LinkedIn. So just type in Themba Mazibuko, connect with me via LinkedIn. You can go to our website of one of our businesses, www.duplexinstitute.com. That's the easiest way to get hold of me. Hopefully, based on the 10 points that we've shared with you, you are going to shield your wealth. Don't be the person that makes money at a stage in your life and then you go on to lose your money or you don't enjoy your money. The thing about money is that money grows over time. There is a law in this world called the law of compound interest. Money should grow over time. It's not the intention of God, it's not the purpose of God for your life for you to be rich and then end up being poor. Over to you, Tafadzo.
Thank you very much, Themba, for your time. You can also subscribe to Themba's YouTube, Manage Your Finances Like a Black Belt. Everyone who has joined us, we appreciate your time. As Themba mentioned, I hope we'll implement that which you have learned so that when we get to the top or to the end, we'll look back and appreciate that it was all worth it because we'll have shielded our wealth. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Let's grow together. Your dream is worth fighting for. Cheers.